Hello friends, welcome to another video of Mule for Learn from D. Today we will see how we can use MuleSoft to connect to an SFTP server, and we will list down the files which are present there inside a directory in SFTP server, and we will just see how we can use secure connection using FTP protocols, which is SFTP, and we will see how we can use um, RSA keys, where we will use public key authentication for SFTP. So let's go ahead. Here the project name is SFTP sample. I have given it this name. I have used HTTP listener, and this is the SFTP list operation which comes under SFTP module. Let me tell you that SFTP module is not available by default in our palette. So what you have to do is you have to click on this add module, and after you click on add module, at the right side you should see the SFTP module, and once you see that, just drag and drop from left to right like this. Okay, so that's how your SFTP module would be added to your palette. Once it is added, you will find your all the operations which are available there inside SFTP module, and from there I'm using list operation, and I have used one transform message which is basically taking the input as the list of files which are there, and that output basically comes from this list operation, and it is taking that output as input to this transform message component. I have written some GW code which will basically list down the files which are there in that particular directory in the SFTP server, and it will show it as the response like this. Okay, so let me take you through the configuration. So in the HTTP listener, I am using standard HTTP listener configuration with the path SFTP. This path value you can give any name, doesn't matter, but based on that your this path would be changed. Okay, now let me take you to the listener configuration. So this is pretty much like HTTP port I am using, host name as default, that is localhost and 8081. Now there is another configuration which we will be using, that is SFTP configuration, and in the SFTP configuration what we have to provide is like the host name, the port of the SFTP server. The host name should be the host name of the server where your SFTP server is running, then the user ID and the password. Okay, along with that, to use SFTP public key authentication you would be needing this file. So I will tell you how you can create these public key and private key files using UTGen. So here we know that I think we are all more or less familiar with PuTTY IDE. So using this one we can connect to our Unix servers, or like wherever we want to, suppose we want to connect to any server. Most of the time we use PuTTY for those kind of things, right? So using PuTTY we can generate public key and private key pair. As you see, this is the option it is showing. So if you just click on generate, you will click on generate, and you have to move your mouse along this empty area, and based on your mouse movement pattern it will generate the public key and private key. Okay, so once it is generated, you can save your public key and you can save your private key. So I have already done this, and if you see here, I have all this saved at my local folder. And what I have done is, like, once my keys are actually, so you need to be careful here. You need to save the private key as .ppk file with this extension, and the public key as .cert extension. Okay, let me tell you that we would be needing this public key to be configured at the SFTP server which we are going to connect using MuleSoft, right? So what I have done is, so let me tell you that the SFTP server I am about to use is the Xlite SFTP server. Okay, so there I have configured this public key, so I will show it to you. So if you see, before going to that, you will see that this IP address is basically a different system. So my Mule application would be running in a separate computer, and my SFTP server is running to another running in another computer. Okay, so here if you see, I have connected to my another computer using remote desktop, and there you can find that it is this is Xlite FTP server. And here what you have to do is just click on this plus icon which shows new virtual server, and once you click on this, you will get some dialog box like this, and there you can basically set based on your configuration. So I have set it as dynamic IP version 4, and the port I have written it as 22. Okay, so that's the reason it is showing as dynamic, as it is dynamic IP. That's the reason it is showing as 0.0.0.0, and the port is 22. After configuring this one, you need to click on this user list. Okay, so in the user list, at first you won't be having any username, so what you have to do is you have to click on this plus button at the right side which says add, and once you click on that, it will show you the dialog box where you have to put the username and password, and that's all, right? So also the home directory, that's basically the local directory where you want your user to point whenever they use this user ID and password to log into the SFTP server, right? Now let's go ahead, and here I have already added one user, and if you see here, this is something the option you have to configure, and as you see, I have use SSH public key authentication, right? So as I said that I would be using the public key dot certificate file which I created there. So let me take you again where I showed you that I saved the files which I generated using PuttyGen. So using this, I generated this. Okay, so this is the file which would be there used in our Xlite FTP server for SFTP configuration, and there we will be using this particular public key file, and this private key file, this would be used in our MuleSoft. And here if you see, this is the file I am referring. So what will happen, based on the secure SSH public key authentication technique, so based on this technique, it will basically it will validate the private key with the public key, and then once it is validated, then it will make the connection successful. So here if you see client initiate SSH connection, then from server it receives hello there, and SSH client, in that case, in this case our MuleSoft application. So MuleSoft application will encrypt message with the secret key. That means this is the private key. So using the private key which we have configured here, using this private key, it is basically encrypting the message, and it is sending back to our SFTP server. So see, till this point the connection, it is just making the connection. So far, I mean, till this point we haven't received any data, or we haven't sent any data from our MuleSoft application to the SSH server, which is Xlite server in this case, Xlite FTP server, right? So once this encrypted message reaches to the server side, it basically decrypts that message using the public key. So that is the whole concept behind it. So the message encrypted with a private key can be decrypted using the public key of that particular key pair only, right? So any other public key won't be able to decrypt that message. That is the whole concept behind this. So once this message is decrypted at server side, then if random access message match send match, then send affirmative response. That means authentication passed. So once the server is able to decrypt that message, it will send back a success response to SSH client. So till this point, it was just the connection, SFTP connection making process was going on, right? So once this is authentication is passed, that means it is the connectivity is now established, right? SFTP connectivity. So by doing this, it is secure, because any other application which is not having this private key, they won't be able to connect to our SFTP server, and any other server which is not having the correct public key won't be able to decrypt the message sent by our SSH client, which is MuleSoft application in this case, right? And once it is done, then the client and server both actually agrees on some session key, right? If you see here, it is mentioned as session key. So let me tell you here that basically we are implementing symmetric key and asymmetric key concept here. So this 1, 2, 3, 4 till this 4 where authentication passed is mentioned. So till this point we are using two different keys, right? So this is basically asymmetric key authentication which is being used in this case. Once the authentication is passed, the connectivity is now using, the connection is now using one session key, which is comes under symmetric key cryptography, right? So first one was asymmetric key cryptography, and second one where we see that agree on session key. So for a session, once the connection is authentication is passed, then it basically moves to the symmetric key cryptography algorithm, and there it actually the client and server decides on session key, which is again a kind of secret key you can think of, and then that key is basically used to send the data, to encrypt the data and send it over network from client to the server, right? So this is how it basically works. Okay, so that's pretty much, and so let me go here, and if you see, I'm using the same file. Okay, so let me tell you that this file I already created it. So whatever file I just showed you here, this file I haven't saved it. Okay, so this is something I haven't saved it. I already done this before configuring this Mule application. So my file is already having another set of public key and private key pair, so that one I am using. So what I will do, I will go back to here in our SFTP server, and there if you see we are using use SSH public key authentication, right? That's all. And in the option I haven't configured anything, but in the user section if you see, as I was showing you, that whenever the user logs in, it will basically see the home path as this local path of the actual server. Okay, so that's pretty much. Now what I will show you is, like, first I will show you by connecting to this server using Filezilla. Okay, so the username is username is Prasenjit, and the password is basically 12345. So if you see here, the password I am using here, it is 12345. Okay, so this same credential we will be using in our Filezilla, and we will check whether the SFTP configuration is working or not. Okay, so let's go here, and I will put the host name, then the username, that is I will copy it from MuleSoft what I have used. So from here I will use it in our Filezilla. Then the password is, as I said, 12345, and the port is 22. Now if I click on quick connect, you will see that it's basically sending us one server host key, right? So if you see here, it's showing that the server host key is unknown. That means we are using Filezilla to connect to this SFTP server for the first time. That's the reason it is giving us this host key algorithm, as well as the fingerprint of the public certificate, which is configured there at the server side. So we have to just click on OK, and if you see, this is the path, and this path is having all these files, right? So file1.txt, file2.txt, there is another folder, and inside this folder we will go and we'll see that it's having basically another two files, that is, one is mule input.txt and another is sample.xml, right? So we can see that the protocol it is showing as SFTP, so everything looks good. Now let's move to our Mule flow, and for the demonstration purpose I have already deployed this flow, and let me just go to Postman, and I will just send another request and show you that it's basically working, right? So if you see here, it's listing down all the files which are there: file1.txt, file2.txt, and mule input.txt, right? But one thing you should notice, that it's not listing down this sample.xml file. What is the reason behind that? If you go to our list operation configuration, there you will find that it's basically having some configuration, right? So let's move ahead, and you see that the file name pattern I have used, that is .txt, star.txt. That means star refers to all the files which is having any name but with the .txt extension, right? So that's the reason it's not listing down this XML file. Okay, so this only listed there. Another thing you should notice, that it's basically listing down all the files which are there inside this parent directory, right? So whether it is the file is in subdirectory or in the parent directory itself, rather say it home directory, because if you see here, this is the home directory for this user. So here these two files are there, but in Mule, inside the Mule folder, we have another this txt file, right? So if we remove this, let's do one thing. Let's remove this one, right? So if we remove this, and now if we just send another request to Mule, then we will see that it's basically listing down only 2, right? So that's how basically it is working. Now let's add another file here. Let's do one thing. Let's create another directory here. So I will say it as directory 1, right? So just I will say it as directory 1, and inside this directory I will create another file. So this is, suppose, Mule sample file 1, and I am making it as .txt extension, right? So once it is done, let's check in our Postman if this file actually reflects here. If you see here, immediately it actually reflects, right? So this is how it is basically working. Let's go to our server and see what is basically happening. If you see here, the online users, this value is showing as 2. That means one user which is connected from our MuleSoft application, and another user is from our Filezilla. Now if you see here, it's currently showing as 1. If you notice, Filezilla basically fixes, it maintains some kind of algorithm, and internally if it is idle for some time, then it basically disconnects, right? Internally disconnects from the server, and later on it basically connects. So we have just refreshed this directory, and let's move ahead here, and if you see, still it is showing as 1. Now what we will do, we will go to our this service, and we will again throw some we'll push some request. Now if you see here, it's showing as 2. So that means MuleSoft, this list operation, that SFTP configuration also follows the same kind of mechanism. If the connection is idle for some time, that means it will internally disconnect the connection to the server, and later on, whenever next request comes, it will basically connect to the server once again. That's how it's working, right? Let's move to another property in our list operation. So that is the recursive is true. So this property can be set to true or false, and also you can use expression to derive this property dynamically, right? So whenever you have some requirement, like in the request you are receiving some query parameter, or suppose in the request you are receiving some JSON payload, and inside that JSON there is some field which basically derives whether to look for the files recursively or non-recursively. In that case you can use expression, right? So in that case this will be usable. Another thing, recursive means, if you come here in the Filezilla, here you basically see that our MuleSoft application is trying to see all the files which are present in the home directory, as well as which are present in the subdirectories as well. Those files are also listed in our response. So if we set this recursive property as false, that won't happen. Okay, so let's do this. I will set this to false, and I'll just save it. So if I just save it, what it will do, it will automatically redeploy this application. As you see, it is automatically redeploying the application, and now we see that our application is now started. So let's do one thing. Let's send another request to our MuleSoft application, and this time if you see, it's just listing down only these two files which are present at the home directory. And you can ask me like where we have mentioned this directory, right? So that is also there in our configuration. So if you see in the list operation property, there we have directory path, right? So here I have mentioned it as the home directory. So this is the one I have mentioned it. So in the remote side, in the Filezilla, whatever path you see here, this one I have taken it from Filezilla and I have used it here. That means it is trying to look into this home directory. What will happen if I just give this path, right? So let's do one thing. I will give this path here. So if you see here, this path I have given, and now I am saving this. So once I will save it, as I said, it will automatically deploy the code, right? So let's wait for this to be deployed, and as you see, our application is now started again. So let's do one thing. Let's send another request, and this time if you see, we don't have any file listed in our result, right? What is the reason? Because if you see in this Mule folder, we don't have any txt file, and at the same time we have our recursive property set to false. That means it won't look to the subdirectories. So that means though we have one txt file in the subdirectory of Mule folder, but that won't be seen by our Mule application because we have set our recursive property as false, right? So that's the thing. Now what we can do, we can just change this .txt to .xml. So what will happen if we do this? Then if you see inside Mule, we have one file XML, right? Sample.xml. This should be listed down, right? So Control S, and as it happens, it will automatically redeploy our code. And let's wait for this to start. And as you see, this has been started. Now let's push another request, and this time, oh, it has given some exception, and that is basically it's showing unexpected end of input in prolog. The result is coming as sample.xml. So let me tell you why the actual error happened. So what Mule application was trying to do is it was trying to validate the content of the XML. So let me show you what is the previously my sample.xml file was having some was not having any data. So what I will do, I will just regenerate the same exception. Okay, so I will just remove this from here, and I will just press file save, and I will upload this back to the server, right? So now if you see, it's basically showing the correct current timestamp, right? So now if I go back to Postman and send another request, it will show us the same exception once again. Okay, this was the exception we received. and that was basically because we were trying to fetch the files which were there in MuleSoft in our Xlite SFTP server directory for the user procedure, and as the sample.xml file was not having any data inside it, that means so let's say an XML file, let's take an XML file, and there a valid XML file should have some parent tag, right? So parent tag should be there, so at least one parent tag should be there. So that was the actual issue behind this. So what I did is, like, I just opened this using Filezilla. From here I opened it using Notepad, and there I just put this data and I just saved it, and I'll close this, and it will ask me to upload this version of the file back to the server. I will say yes, and once it is done, if we send another request, see, we haven't redeployed our application or anything, right? So internally, MuleSoft application, this list operation was trying to validate the content of the file based on its extension, right? So that's what actually happening in background, and that was the reason at the time when we don't have any valid data inside our XML file, it was not able to it was throwing exception, right? So now another question comes in our mind, like then in case of .txt extension, why it was not giving us exception? Because for .txt we don't have any an empty file is also valid for .txt, right? But for XML we don't have that kind of provision. So for XML it should be having proper at least one parent tag inside that XML file. That's what it is trying to do. Okay friends, so this was pretty much I wanted to share in this video. I hope you like it.